Good day. Good to see you. Bonjour. I'm joined with my critic for health and the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Kingsway. Today we'll be tabling our Canada Pharmacare Act. And the purpose of this bill is to help people out. People that are struggling with the cost of their medication. People that are feeling squeezed with everyday costs going up. On top of that, are paying actually the third most expensive in the world prices for medication. Canada is the third most expensive jurisdiction. We often think about the States and think, oh, we're a lot better, but we're actually quite expensive if you compare globally. So people that are buying their medication, people that are purchasing things that they need to continue to work, to live their lives, are paying a lot more than they should be. And we've got a Liberal government that has recently made decisions that have continued those prices to be amongst the highest in the world. We've got a Liberal government, a Prime Minister and a Health Minister that have sided with the billionaire CEOs of these wealthy corporations instead of Canadians and families that are just trying to buy the medication that they need. So this is a first step towards universal medication coverage for all. We believe no one should have to choose between buying their medication or buying their groceries. And this bill will move us towards that. This is based on the Hoskins report, which laid out one of the major first steps is to have a legal framework based on the Canada Health Act that would allow us to move forward with universal pharmacare. That's what this bill is that we presented today. I'm really proud to have seconded the bill that was presented by Don Davies, and we're going to be continuing to put pressure on this. This is something we really believe in. We believe people will save money. This will save money for families. This will save money for provinces and territories. This will save money for the federal government. This is about making an investment that will eventually save significantly for people, and it'll save for people right away. And it's also about a choice. We choose people, while the Liberals have chose to protect billionaires and the CEOs of these wealthy pharmaceutical corporations. We choose standing up for families. Donc aujourd'hui, on a déposé notre projet de loi. C'est un projet de loi pour l'assurance médicaments universelle. C'est un projet de loi basé sur les mêmes principes que de la loi canadienne sur la santé. Et c'est le premier pas pour aller de l'avant avec un soin et une assurance médicaments universelle. On pense que personne ne devrait choisir entre l'épicerie ou les médicaments. Et c'est une approche pour réaliser cet espoir qu'on a. Et on paye à ce moment au Canada, notre pays, c'est le troisième plus cher au monde si on parle des coûts des médicaments. On veut changer ça. On a un gouvernement libéral qui choisit de protéger les profits des grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques. On doit et on veut protéger les monsieur, madame, tout le monde. Donc, c'est exactement ce qu'on va faire aujourd'hui. Je vais passer la parole à Don Davies. I'm going to pass the mic to Don, who's going to provide some more details about what this bill is going to do. Don, mic's yours.
Thank you, Jagmeet. Good morning, everyone. It's, I think, a historic day to come from the Chamber as I just introduced the Canada Pharmacare Act, seconded by our NDP leader, which would be the single biggest expansion of our public healthcare system on a universal basis in 60 years. And Jagmeet Singh follows in a long line of great NDP leaders who really have built our healthcare system and expanded it from Tommy Douglas on. And we carry on that tradition today. The Canada Pharmacare Act that we just introduced is the framework for what a universal single-payer pharmacare system should look like. It is based on the principles of the Canada Health Act and follows the recommendations of the government's own Hoskins Advisory Council. For New Democrats, it is important that the legislation conforms to both of these documents, but the most critical requirements are that the system be universal, comprehensive, and public. That is the only way that we can achieve the savings, the efficiencies, and the fairness that Canadians require. So far, the Liberals have not been clear on where they are on this. We have been, and we are today. Now, Liberals have been promising public pharmacare for 25 years, but Canadians are still facing sky-high prescription costs that make it harder to make ends meet. Time and time again, Justin Trudeau and his team have caved into the demands of Big Pharma instead of helping Canadians. Most recently, we saw the Liberal Health Minister intervene in Canada's independent drug price regulator to block reforms that are meant to save Canadians billions of dollars on the price of their prescription medications. Documents recently obtained by the Health Committee contain several very disturbing revelations, but they all point to one inescapable theme. The Health Minister suspended measures that would lower the cost for Canadians because the pharmaceutical industry demanded it. When pressured, this government once again put corporate profits above patients' health. We need to reverse this trend. As stated, the Canada Pharmacare Act is modeled on the Canada Health Act and on the very considered and expert recommendations of the Hoskins Advisory Council, along with other expert reports. Like the Canada Health Act, the Canada Pharmacare Act specifies the conditions that provincial and territorial prescription drug insurance programs must meet in order to receive federal funding. This includes tying federal funding to the core principles of public administration, portability, universality, comprehensiveness, and public administration. Like the Canada Health Act, the Canada Pharmacare Act doesn't prescribe a specific fiscal arrangement between provincial, territorial, and federal governments. Rather, it lets the federal government negotiate with the provinces and territories. Like the Canada Health Act, the Canada Pharmacare Act gives power to the Governor and Council to withhold contributions to provinces if they don't respect the conditions of funding, just like our Medicare system. Finally, the Canada Pharmacare Act also asks the Minister to establish, in collaboration with provinces, an independent drug agency whose mandate will be, in general, to improve prescription medicine usage and practices in our country. These include measures that would assess the clinical effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of prescription drugs compared to other treatment options, advise on which prescription drugs and supplies should be insured, negotiate prices and supply arrangements of prescription drugs with manufacturers to achieve the 40% savings that bulk buying has been proved in many other jurisdictions to produce, to provide advice to healthcare practitioners and patients on how best to use prescription drugs, and using fact-based evidence to monitor the safety and clinical effectiveness of prescription drugs. Once again, today is a historic day. We look forward to working together with Liberal government to close this long overdue gap and fulfill the dream of Tommy Douglas and many others to provide head-to-toe health care for Canadians. We can take a large step forward by passing this legislation here in this Parliament. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Merci. Please take it away.
Ask questions. Politically, what is the reason for doing this when the Liberals have promised to table their own pharmacare legislation by the end of the year? Is that you don't trust they're going to do it, or that you don't trust what the content of that bill is going to be?
We want to keep the pressure up. We found that with this government, even if we've got things in writing, that it's not guaranteed. We've got to continually fight, put pressure, push them to deliver. So with pharmacare, it's no different. This is definitely in our agreement that we have a legislation of this type with these principles passed by the end of the year. We want to lay out, make it easy for them. Here's the legislation. You can take this, make it into a government bill, present it, and pass it. We want to keep the pressure up. This is something very important to us, and we're doing that in a concrete way by presenting the bill today.
Any measures that are in your bill that if they are not in the Liberal bill would be a deal breaker for you?
Well, we've laid out the principles, and Don's done a good job of laying out the principles. The principles are based on the government's own work. The government did a report, the Hoskins report, and it laid out certain principles. We want the government to follow exactly those principles, which were deemed to be, not just in that report, but many others, the best way forward for Canada to have a program that's going to create fairness, that's going to lower costs, that's going to be good for everyone. And that's the universal single-payer, publicly administered program. So those are the main criteria, the main principles. And we look forward to the government now listening to what we've put forward and putting forward a government bill.
But the supply and confidence deal is non-prescriptive about what would be in the government's legislation they're supposed to table by the end of the year. So if it doesn't include these principles, is it worth anything to you, and what does that mean for the deal?
Well, we expect them to follow these principles. When we negotiated the deal, they knew very well what we meant. And so they're on notice now, and we've provided a path forward for them. And we now are going to wait and see what the government does. But we want this to be something that Canadians are aware of. We want to continue that public pressure as well. This is something that's going to benefit Canadians. We were also deeply concerned, as Don pointed out, that recent decisions taken by the Liberal government specifically undermined the work of basically Canada's medication price regulator. And a number of members of that board actually resigned in protest, given how upset they were with the government's actions. The government sided with big pharmaceutical companies to the damage, to the detriment of Canadians. And those folks that were a part of that board resigned because they thought that this was inappropriate. So that's a very clear message that they are sending to the government that it was wrong what they did. The fact that the Minister of Health and the Liberal government in general, the Prime Minister, are siding with billionaire pharmaceutical companies to the detriment of Canadians that are having a hard time buying their medication. That's something that's wrong, and that's why we wanted to ramp up the pressure and saying, well, here's a step forward that's actually going to take a big step forward for Canadians and take a big step against these pharmaceutical companies that are exploiting people.
Qu'est-ce qui ne fonctionne pas avec l'approche du gouvernement par rapport à l'assurance médicaments selon vous?
Ils n'ont pas une approche. Ils ont parlé beaucoup, c'était des belles paroles, mais sans action. Et donc, ils ont promis, comme Don a dit, depuis presque 25 ans d'avoir une assurance médicaments universelle. Ils n'ont rien fait. Et maintenant, on a forcé ce gouvernement d'inclure dans notre entente le fait que d'ici fin d'année, on doit avoir un projet de loi passé dans le Parlement pour l'assurance médicaments universelle. On a proposé un projet de loi avec les éléments nécessaires parce que le gouvernement libéral n'agit pas et quand il agit, il défend les profits des grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques au lieu de monsieur, madame, tout le monde.
Should Canadians expect to have an election called by the end of the year on this? I mean, we only have about a week left here. In the fall, by the time Parliament comes back, we're looking at only 2 to 3 months to be able to get this type of legislation passed. So are you prepared to call an election over this if it doesn't pass by the end of 2023?
Well, we're nowhere in that position yet. There's more than enough time to pass the bill. Our goal is to get this bill passed. Our goal is to make sure Canadians can afford their medication. Our goal is to send a clear message that we should be working in government to defend people, not like the Liberals are doing, defend the big pharmaceutical companies. That's wrong. And the fact that the regulators of drug prices in Canada, the members of that board resigned because they were offended effectively at the government's actions, the fact that they were intervening and blocking measures that would have lowered the cost of medication for Canadians is a clear signal that this government is not on the side of people. Because of that, we are ramping up pressure. We're making it very clear that this is where we stand. This is a part of our agreement, and we expect the government to act.
Since you can't have spending in a private member's bill, as I understand it, you can't include the spending component. Would there still have to be legislation from the government side after this to actually make pharmacare become a reality? Because my understanding is a private member's bill can't mandate spending.
You're absolutely right. But according to the Hoskins report, so the government's own report on pharmacare, this is one of the first steps. So just like the Canada Health Act, which is a bill that doesn't require spending, this is the legal framework for us to move forward. This is one of the steps necessary for us to move forward with pharmacare. There will be other steps absolutely necessary, and we've laid those out also in our agreement. There'll need to be a bulk purchasing plan, how we're purchasing the medication in bulk. There will need to be a formulary, so what medication is covered. These are steps that are additionally going to be required. Then ultimately, when we move forward with the actual delivery of the program, there'll need to be negotiations with provinces. This bill lays out that those negotiations can happen and how they should happen, much like the Canada Health Act. So it really lays out the framework for us to move forward on pharmacare. So it is really a major step forward. As Don said, it's a historic step forward for us to realize something that's for a long time been the missing link of our Medicare system. We're the only country in the world that has universal health care that doesn't also include medication coverage for a good reason. Every other country figured out that it makes no sense to be able to provide universal coverage if people can't actually afford their medication or people are paying so much for medication that it's so costly. It doesn't make sense. This is a way to lower costs, save money for families, and for us to move forward in a real positive way with our healthcare system.
You've mentioned, Mr. Singh, you've mentioned the PMPRB situation. I'd also like to go a little bit behind the scenes. MP Davies might be able to answer this. I know that the critics in your party are meeting with ministers as a part of this agreement. MP Davies, can you tell us, is there anything behind the scenes going on where you just feel like there's a lack of progress that makes this bill necessary?
Not really. In fact, in terms of us working together on dental care, I'm very pleased with the progress that we've made so far. And we've had some productive conversations even on pharmacare. But, the one thing that the Liberals have not stated to this day is their commitment to the single-payer system. That's not been said by the Prime Minister. It's not been said by any health minister. And for us, every single one of the task forces, commissions, committees that have ever looked at pharmacare, by my count there's been 7, have all come to the same conclusion, that the only way that you can achieve the savings of pharmacare and also make sure that you have comprehensive coverage is through our public system. And yet we have not heard the Liberals commit to that. So, I think that the history in this country is that we wouldn't have a healthcare system without the New Democrats and Liberals working together on it, but we also wouldn't have it without the New Democrats driving the agenda forward. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing here today. We're driving this forward, and I hope to hear from the Prime Minister or the Health Minister anytime now their commitment to the single-payer system, and then it's just a matter of passing legislation, which we've done the work and drafted for them.
Mr. Singh, by tabling this bill today, are you essentially saying that, this entire time that you've had this agreement with the Liberals, you haven't been working with them to craft a government bill on pharmacare? Has there been any collaboration on this?
So far, we've been focused on dental care, as Don was mentioning, that's been our priority. But there's a number of other things that need to get done by the end of this year. And this is another priority. And so far, while Don mentioned that there's been conversations, which is some of the initial steps, initial work that was necessary for us to move forward, we want to accelerate that. We want to show them, well, here's the work's done. There's no poison pill here. This is a straightforward bill based on the government's own commission's report. So it lays out exactly what the commission itself recommends. We've introduced that into a bill format, and this is one of the steps that's necessary, and this is a part of our agreement. So we've done the work for them. They can move forward with it. We've started some conversations, but we want to put pressure on them. Like Don mentioned, we found with this government that just because we have an agreement doesn't mean things get done. We've got to continue to push for it. We've got to continue to fight for it. And that's what Canadians can expect from us. We are fighters, and we believe in making sure people get a break. We want to make sure medication prices come down. And this is a concrete way to give people a real break. They're going to have free medication when we have universal pharmacare. And it's the right thing to do.
Speaking of that dynamic you were talking about, sorry, did you? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about the PMPRB.
Yeah.
Either of you can answer. Do you trust the federal health minister to be able to champion pharmacare and implement it, given some of the issues you've raised with him and his potential connections to the industry?
Yeah, we're deeply concerned. And I think that there's not enough attention paid to this issue. This is shocking. The fact that we got a regulation body, a regulator for medication pricing in Canada that recommended some key steps that would have cost us no money, zero cost, and it would have lowered for Canadians the cost of their medication by billions of dollars. This would have been massive savings. And the government blocked those steps, didn't just say, okay, we're not going to do them, literally intervened in such a way that the members of this board had to resign in protest because the government is intervening in steps that would have cost Canada $0, but it would have lowered the cost of medication by billions of dollars for people. So what that leaves us with is we've got a Liberal government that sides with the pharmaceutical industry over people. That's very problematic. On top of that, we've got, and so what we're left with is the government's blocked a number of those recommendations. Even the final recommendation that they're tacitly saying might go ahead, even that was further delayed. And I think Don can talk more about those details.
Sorry, did you have a specific question?
Well, specifically, do you trust the federal health minister to implement pharmacare given some of the issues you've raised about?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just like when Medicare was fought for in the 40s and the 60s, there are forces in this society that don't want it. There was a doctor's strike in Saskatchewan when Tommy Douglas introduced it in that province, and I don't think it's any secret that Big Pharma and the insurance industry are not enamored with a public pharmacare system. So, no, standing in stark contrast to that are many, many, many other stakeholders that are pushing for this, including Canadians, where polling has showed, upward of 85, 90% of Canadians want this. So there's no doubt that Minister Duclos and the Liberal government are being pressured by other forces. So what we want to do is add some pressure on the other side on this. And do I trust them? Yes. And I hope that they will do the right thing. But they also need to have those messages that they're getting from Big Pharma and the insurance industry countered in a strong way. And as the political partner in this confidence and supply agreement, we think it's our job to pressure them to do the right thing. And look, Dr. Eric Hoskins is not a New Democrat. He was a Liberal health minister in Ontario. And he was specifically entrusted by Prime Minister Trudeau to look into this issue and come up with his own recommendations after the Health Committee had already studied this for 2 years and recommended public health care. He came to the same conclusion as our Health Committee did. So, it's very important in politics, I think, that we keep pressure on, and that's what we're doing here on the Liberal government. There were very concerning things that happened in the PMPRB. The Minister of Health said that he requested the PMPRB to suspend these reforms because he had not been consulted. And yet, when we got documents supplied to us, there were 5 separate requests by the PMPRB to meet with the minister to talk about these very things, including a letter from the chair on November 30th, after the minister requested that the board suspend the regulations, the reforms, to meet with her. And yet he said that there was no invitation to him to meet, and he would have gladly met if he had received an invitation. He also said that he was just a mere request, but internal documents from the chair make it clear that she viewed that as a demand, and she was very reluctant to, in her words, go against the minister's wishes. So, when in the face of that kind of information, we believe, obviously, that that's pressure from the pharmaceutical industry that's on the minister, and we're here to counter that and make sure he does the right thing. It's how we got healthcare, and it's how we're going to get pharmacare in this country.
Are you concerned?
No, go ahead.
Are you concerned that you pushed heavily for Dedicare as part of your agreement? A year later, Liberals rarely miss a chance to kind of call it their own program. That if you succeed in twisting their arms to do this a year from now, they'll be saying that it was their idea.
It's a very fair question. We get this kind of question a lot. For me and for us as New Democrats, the goal here is to actually get it done. And the goal here is for people that are right now paying so much money for their medication to not have to worry about that. In a time when people are already feeling so squeezed, cost of groceries are up, the cost of their mortgages are up because the interest rates are so high. This is a way to give people a break. And this would help families that are, we got parents, moms and dads that are maybe buying diabetes medication or purchasing cholesterol medication. This will save money for families in a real way. And so for us, that is the goal. That is the victory. And we'll let people know that we fought for them. We'll let people know that we raise their voice. But ultimately, whether the credit ends up going with the Liberals or not, it doesn't matter. If we can get pharmacare done, meaning people will save money and we can make people healthier and we can ensure that people are better off, that is our victory. That's the goal for New Democrats.
And is the confidence and supply agreement working for you right now? Like Evans pointed out, the Liberals have taken credit for the dental care. You also said they're not clear on positions. Even when we're looking at the foreign interference, you're saying that they've ignored the will of Parliament. They ignored what you were saying about Mr. Johnston. So why continue with them as partners and give them your support if you're pointing out all of these factors?
2 years ago, the Liberals voted against dental care with the Conservatives. 2 years later, 300,000 kids in our country are accessing dental care. 2 years ago, the Liberals voted against dental care with the Conservatives, and by the end of this year, seniors are going to be able to get their teeth looked after. That shows that New Democrats have proven that we can deliver. When we said from the beginning there needs to be a public inquiry, the Liberals said no. When we said that Mr. Johnston should no longer continue, when we forced a vote on it, the Liberals said no. Mr. Johnston has now resigned, and one of the Dominic LeBlanc has now said he's open to a public inquiry. New Democrats deliver. We don't back down. We keep on fighting. And the evidence is we fight and we win. And we've done that now. And so with pharmacare, it's no different. We're going to fight, and New Democrats are going to win, and we're going to make sure people are better off.
And I actually have one last question
Yeah.
on the public inquiry. The Bloc Québécois put forward some names today, including Louise Arbour, Erwin Kotler, Guy Saint-Jacques. Are those names that you'd support, and are there any people that you've put forward that you'd like to see in the role?
A very fair question. I want to lay out the way I want to approach this. We've laid out criteria in terms of what we expect for someone to lead a public inquiry. A judge, either sitting or a retired judge, someone who hasn't donated to a political party in a number of years, and being a judge would help assist in that criteria. And particularly given some of the allegations in this case, one example we gave was that someone that's not affiliated with the Trudeau Foundation for specific allegations related to that. Those are some of the criteria. In terms of the names, the way we want to approach this is I suggested the model that we used in the provincial parliament in Ontario, where there was there were representatives from each of the recognized parties in a committee that was chaired by the Speaker of the House, and the vetting of each candidate was done, and then each of those candidates were presented to members of the recognized parties, and then we all decided in a unanimous fashion the officers of Parliament. That's how I was involved in the selection of the Auditor General in Ontario, and that is a process where each party is involved. Parties sign off on the final decision, but we have a proper vetting process. We analyze each of the candidates. We assess their resumes as well as whether or not there's any specific concerns that might be there. That would be the process that I'd want to follow. Instead of just approving or not approving names, I would like us to engage in a real proper process like that, where we can all come to a consensus on an agreement on a name. And it's a process like that that would give Canadians confidence as well that we've done our work and that we've done the proper vetting.
When will you be meeting with the other opposition leaders to discuss this?
We're open to meeting at any time. We've also already started this process in our motion that called for Mr. Johnson to step down, and Mr. Johnson has now stepped down. In that motion, we also included that PROC should begin the work of setting the terms of reference and a process around how to find candidates. So that work has already begun. Obviously, in that committee, each party has already a representative there. We're prepared to supplement that with additional meetings with leaders, and I'm open to setting that up anytime.
How important is the deadline in terms of whether this bill, whether it stays your bill, whether it becomes a government bill, being passed December 31st, 2023? How important is that to you continuing the agreement? You say there's plenty of time. We're literally in the last week or so of Parliament. You guys don't get back till the end of September, et cetera, et cetera. Things always happen. How important is that deadline to you?
Very important.
Is it a deal breaker, passing the bill?
It's very important. It's in our agreement that it has to be done by the end of the year.
Okay.
But not a
Sur
deal
la
breaker.
question d'une autre nomination, on a appris que le juge Russell Brown a démissionné hier. Tout d'abord, votre réaction par rapport à sa démission dans le contexte qu'on connaît, dans les détails qu'on connaît, et ce que le gouvernement devrait avoir comme critère pour la suite des choses pour un prochain juge.
On appuie la décision de de Justice Brown de se démissionner. Elle a donné comme raison le fait que c'était une distraction et on est d'accord que toutes les allégations, même si ce sont des allégations, ont créé une distraction pour le travail important de Cour suprême. Et donc, on appuie la décision. En général, on doit avoir les critères d'avoir quelqu'un qui a la capacité de faire le travail nécessaire au niveau de Cour suprême. Donc, un critère rigide avec des candidats excellents. Et on a plusieurs candidats excellents à travers le pays.
Did you give the Liberals a heads up about this pharmacare bill, and what was the reaction?
The Liberals know where we stand, and we've been telling them that we're going to continue the pressure. So it should come as no surprise that we've tabled a bill. We've tabled a bill in the past. This is the same bill that we tabled 2 years ago. So for the Liberals, they're well aware of where we stand. And as Don said, we don't know where they stand yet, but we've been very clear. This is where we stand. We've tabled the exact same bill before. And again, we're following exactly the Commission's recommendation. So this is what Don, I think, laid it out very well. This is Dr. Eric Hoskins was a Liberal health minister when I was actually in provincial politics. I know him well from that time. Clearly someone who was a Liberal, but in fairness, did the right thing. His commission laid out exactly what we think is the right path forward. So we took that into a bill format and presented it. So it should be no surprise. This is exactly what his own commission recommended. This is what we presented in the past, and we're presenting again.
Well, if you're not saying it, sorry, if you're not saying in reply to Tessa that you wouldn't commit to saying it's a deal breaker if it doesn't pass by the fall.
Well, everything in our agreement, these are firm things. We said with dental care, it has to be done by last year for kids under 12. We forced them to do it. For this year, it's got to be dental care by the end of this year. We're going to force them to do it. So these are all clearly laid out in our agreement. There's a number of things that have to be done, and that's exactly what we expect to be done. So this is absolutely required by our agreement that we have this bill tabled and passed by the end of this year. And that's what's happened in the past with the children under 12, with the dental care this year, and these are things that we're going to force the government to do. Merci, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So your papers, I kept on holding them as if they were mine. That's good.